Okay, so I'll just start off. Like I said, my name is Craig Dinkle, crop production agent for the Midway District. Decided to kind of do a virtual Milo of our plot this year with everything going on, and plus we had some issues there, and it probably wasn't going to be any ideal of having an in-person one anyways. The location kind of not the best, and then plus we had some weed issues, and that's kind of why I asked Sarah to come in and talk about weeds too. And so we'll kind of start off with the Milo variety discussions of what we have in there, and then kind of switch over to the weed control options and the other topics that Lucas will be talking about. This plot is located about 4 miles northwest of Holyrood, Kansas, on Avenue P and 3rd Road. So if anybody wants to kind of venture out that way, take a gander at it, sure, welcome to. We planted it on June 8th, and actually Bob Sibley with Solomon Rapid Seed kind of came down and helped plant it. I don't think he's going to be on today. And then we planted her about June 8th, and the cooperator farmer that has the land is Ernie Yazik. So with that, we'll kind of move into the varieties. And like I said, whenever we come up to your variety, just introduce yourself and who you're with. Make sure Bob's not on here. Nope, doesn't look like it. So take this one. Like I said, this Heartland Genetics HD 48B. It's a medium maturing bronze colored grain hybrid that's adapted to multiple environments, strong agronomic package, and has a good producing constant yields over a wide range of conditions. Good early growth in cooler soils than most hybrids, and it's a medium in height with good uniformity and standability. And that's kind of about all the main points on the website that I pulled from that one. Like I said, Bob Sibley with Solomon Rapid Seed kind of got me the Heartland variety, so that's where this seed came from. Next is 3816 DeKalb. Who's talking on that one?
I believe I am. Adam Hickle here at the Graven Co-op for John Brenneman. He had a personal plot today. He wasn't going to be able to make it, so I'm going to step in and talk for him real quick here. 3816, it's a very good dryland variety, excellent standability, good yield potential in the sand or in the your good heavy dirts. It has a tight, compact head, so driving by it sometimes doesn't look like there's a lot out there, but there's always a lot of grain in there. Always has excellent test weights with it, and the only downfall about this variety here is that it does not have any sugarcane aphid tolerance with it. So that's the big downfall. Other than that, it's a great, very good overall throughout any environment. Excellent Milo variety here. So
thank you. And now we got A6Y89, and I believe Mike Craighauser is on.
Yep, Mike Craighauser, field agronomist for this part of the world. A6Y89 is, we call it a 110 CRM. It's average for sugarcane aphid tolerance. Has a lot of good high yield potential with it. Tillers very well, so we can do some lower populations with it. Kind of a semi-compact head is what I would say on it. A lot of the placement that we do with this is kind of on some better ground with the high yield capability that it has, not Not that it won't fall apart or it'll fall apart or anything on some tough situations, but with the opportunity yield that it has, the flex in the head and everything, I really like it on some good wheat stubble, that type of conditions versus say like second year Milo or following bean stalks later on in the season. So really good high yield. One of our top sellers, and that medium maturity is a 110 CRM.
Thank you, Mike. We got, this is a Warner variety, 5911. And I believe Ryan's on.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
This is our first year of selling 5911. We're excited to see what it looks like. There's a couple things that I always look for when I pick varieties to bring in. One is the sugar aphid tolerance. Two is the drought tolerance, and three is the standability. I've picked up many acres of Milo off the ground, and I don't like it. Up central Kansas, we're in kind of a, I would say, a little bit different climate than maybe some of the others. We've seen a heck of a lot of drought in the last few years, and I've seen a lot of Milo that just didn't make Milo. So drought is a big issue that I look for. The 5911 is excellent for the sugarcane aphids, excellent for the drought. It's a medium early with good standability, and it'll be a bronze color.
Thank you. Greg, you're up on Phillips 637.
I'm Greg Henderson with Phillips Seed, based out of our Tescott location. Our 637 Milo, that's our most popular, best-selling Milo, and it's got it's a medium early maturity, about 63 days to mid-bloom, around 105 to 110 days to full maturity. On our rating scale, we go 1 to 5, with 1 being excellent, 5 being poor. It's got excellent drought tolerance. We give it a 1 rating for drought. It's going to take tough conditions, handle that well. Tougher acres. It's very, very adaptable to any situation. Excellent standability. Cutting down Milo is no fun at all, as was mentioned earlier. We give it a 1 rating for standability. Excellent seedling vigor, can really pop out of the ground and get going quickly. Has a high tolerance to sugarcane aphid, a 1 rating for tolerance to sugarcane aphid. It's a semi-open head with a bronze grain color. Like I said before, it's our best-selling Milo, best-selling variety, and very adaptable. Should work about anywhere across the state on any conditions. That's pretty much all
Thanks,
I got.
Greg.
Thank you.
Thanks. I guess this is Ryan's again on the Sorghum Partners.
We've sold sorghum partners for 3 or 4 years now. This 43M80 is brand new. This is the first year we've had it. A lot of the traits are similar to the 68M57 that we'll see later here. The only difference really is that it's a medium early. So this is a medium early. Again, high sugarcane aphid tolerance, very drought tolerant, and good standability.
Thank you. Now on to Golden Acres with Rusty.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Hey, thanks, Craig. I'm Rusty Klitsky out of Waukene, Kansas. I represent LG Seeds. That's a company of AgReliant genetics out of Westfield, Indiana. Our sorghum is a Golden Acres that I actually worked for Golden Acres Genetics when it was purchased by AgReliant Genetics, and now we've brought that into the LG Seeds brand. So LG Seeds will be the distributors for the Golden Acres sorghum. We're looking at 48 ADR, This is going to be the fullest season offering in our lineup. So it's going to be a full. If the first number represents maturity with our numbering system. So if we have a 1, that would be an early, a 4 would be a full. The R represents the color. So this will be a red grain color. It will be tall, has good standability for height. This was very good in all the trials that we had it last year. In the Barton County trial, that was planted June 22nd. So it got nipped by frost a little, but it was still competitive. Rush County plot last year, it was near the top. Phillips, I had one in Plainville. And that was, and both these were multiple companies. It was at the top by 20 bushel up at Plainville versus DeKalb, Sorghum Partners, and a couple Pioneer varieties. So this is going to be a real, I'd say, a racehorse for us, but it does seem to have really good drought tolerance, and it did exert the head well under stress, because of that Plainville location last year. It was really pretty dry for right through most of July and the end of June, first part of August. It'll be an irrigated offering, definitely for south central Kansas. Out west, it may be a little too long unless you're getting into southwest Kansas. It has a good health package and offers a good threshing grain and a little more open head style. I don't have any, I'm actually in a plot right now just north of Ransom. I have 3180B. I don't have the 4880R. So when we get to my next variety, I'll have a little extra video for that. That's it for this variety. Thanks, Craig.
Thanks, Rusty. And like it says, this would be our check variety, but like I said, I'm not going to take this plot to yield, and this is 85Y40 is planted in the rest of the field that the farmer planted. Like I said, since we had a couple planting issues and stand issues in this plot, so this would have been our check variety, 85Y40.
Yeah, this has kind of been a longer hybrid for us. I mean, it's kind of that 112, 114 range. Been around for a long time. It's a yellow, white, cream, whatever you want to call it, kind of like 86Y89. We like to put this in a lot of varieties of soils, so I actually use this for my 112 checks too, Craig, so good choice there.
Thank you. Now Ryan again with another Sorghum Partners.
That's 68M57. It's really been a good variety for us. It's our most popular just because it's a medium to a medium full variety. It's a lot like the other ones. It'll be a bronze color. It'll be excellent standability, excellent drought tolerant, and moderate sugarcane aphid.
All right, thank you. Next one, we got another Heartwind variety. The 47B is a newer Heartwind variety. It's about a medium maturing bronze hybrid. Has resistance to sugarcane aphid. It's about a medium tall hybrid with excellent staggering characteristics and high yield. It's positioned pretty well for the entire state of Kansas and can be planted in most conditions with good, it also has good head exertion and semi-open head type and good drought tolerance. So that's kind of the rundown of Heartwind's 47B. Mike with another Pioneer.
Yeah, 86P33. This is a newer one that we've had out for a couple years now. Looking at adding to our lineup or possibly replacing the old G32. What we like about it, very good stress package on it. It's It's a 107, so it's a little bit longer than G32, probably about 3 or 4 days longer to bloom than G32. Still handles those same stressful soils all the way up to the good irrigated. Medium plant height. The other good thing that we've been testing this in our impact plots and then strip trials the last 2 years is it does have the same high pH tolerance too as G32, which is where we place a lot of our G32. So really excited to have this one, a little higher yield potential, a little better standability, and also having that same high pH tolerance.
Thank you. Now Greg with the 746.
Yeah, our 746 Milo, it's the full of season variety that we offer. It's a medium full maturity with 74 days to mid bloom, around 110 to 120 days to full maturity. Again, on our rating scale, we go 1 to 5, with 1 being excellent. Pretty much give the 746 a 2 rating in most categories. It's got very good drought tolerance, not quite as good as our 637, but still can take some pretty tough conditions. Very good standability. Again, a 2 rating for standability. Very good seedling vigor. It doesn't come out of the ground quite as quick as the 637, but still a good seedling vigor on it. It has a high sugarcane aphid tolerance, a 1 rating on that. It's a little bit taller variety, but it still stands well. Might be a good quality leaf area, so it might be one to consider for grazing. It's a semi-open head with bronze grain color. That's
Thank you.
all I got, Craig.
All right. Now on the 5353 decal.
Yeah, this here is a fuller season Milo here in the decal lineup. It has a nice big head on it. If you're really shooting for a home run, put on some better ground, this is the variety here. Just like the 3816, though, it does not have any sugarcane aphid tolerance with it, but it's also puts on just big leaves, full leaves. So it's also a very good grazing option for this Milo. Decal's also coming out with a 4407 and a 3607 that will be out next year, that both have the aphid tolerance and have looked really well in the plots. So there'll be some sugarcane aphid tolerance for the upcoming year here. So that's all I got.
Thank you. Back to Rusty with the Golden Acres.
Alrighty, and I don't know if I mentioned, but 4880R, the full is aphid tolerant. 3180B is as well going to be an aphid tolerant, medium, full, 66 to 69 days to mid bloom. Very compact head, good threshability, good head exertion. This plot that I'm in Ness County, we really missed quite a few rains here in July, into July and first part of August there. So we're starting to fire some leaves, and the head exertion was pretty good here. If I can show video and flip my screen. There we go. Can you guys see the Milo now?
Yep.
All righty. So this is going to be pretty representative here of a 3180B head. It's going to be very, very compact. It's going to be tight to row. And as you can see here, we were firing some bottom leaves. This is back into Milo stubble. Now just starting to get some color on it. This was planted about the June 15th mark, so a little later than your plot there. But this is a first year commercial release for us, so we're really just getting a good feel for it. but it's going to should cover a lot of acres in central Kansas, south central Kansas. It's taller under good conditions. This is really about the right height for what guys out here would want to do, because they would like to have some good height for grazing, but they don't want things to get too tall. We get a lot of those nasty wind events and an early frost fairly often in this area. So this may be something we use this far west, but where you're working there in Ellsworth County, this is definitely something that we'll be looking at in that part of the world. Thank you, Craig.
All right, thanks. And this should be the last one, is Warner 625.
We've had Warner for several years. Like I was saying, this has been the most popular. Probably the thing that I like least about the 625 is it's supposed to be a medium height, but if you get that late July, August rain like we've seen the last 2 years, it can get really tall. Does it look really tall out there, Craig?
Not really. I mean, not compared to, I mean, it's about the same as all the other varieties, it seems like. So
last year it got really tall. It was 50 some inches. Everybody that had it was scared to death that it was going to fall over, but that's one of the qualities that it has. Its standability is excellent. Like I said, this is one of Warner's oldest numbers. It is a medium maturity, and they classify it as a yellow, but depending on the year, again, it'll really change between a cream and a yellow and a white. It has moderate sugarcane aphid tolerance, and it's very droughty also. Thank you.
all right. Thank you. Like I said, that's kind of the rundown on the varieties. I'll stop sharing here and get switched over to Sarah for her. Gotta refigure out how to do this. I'll just make you the host, I guess, for now. Sarah. You're muted, Sarah.
There, that should be better, right? Let's see if I can find the right screen to share. Are you guys seeing my slide set here? Are you seeing the slide set, Craig?
Yep, you're good.
You're hearing me okay?
Yep.
All right, so good morning. Craig asked me to share a few comments about weed control in grain sorghum. So one of the things that I got a lot of calls about earlier this summer, it's not super new news, right? But this idea of herbicide-resistant grain sorghums, one of the things that was sparking those phone calls was this trait listed here in the middle, eye growth. And the reason it was sparking a lot of phone calls is because they're really promoting for a launch next summer. So I thought it would be good to give kind of a quick and dirty overview of these herbicide-resistant grain sorghums. I've got a little bit of data related to weed control in these systems to share with you guys. And then I wanted to talk just a minute about herbicide stewardship or product stewardship in these programs. So the three programs we've got here, we've got Enzyme from Corteva. The active ingredient that grain sorghum is resistant to is nicosulfuron. That's going to be sold as zest, and it's available now. The big question here, which has been the story for a number of years now, is when are these varieties going to be available? My sources say they're considering some potentially for 2021, but we'll see what happens. The second here would be eye growth that I mentioned before. That seed is produced by a company called Advanta. And then the herbicide that is labeled for this product is registered by a company called UPI. So the name of that herbicide is going to be Imiflex herbicide, and that active ingredient is imazamox, which is the same as Raptor. Again, planning for a launch next year, but they're still waiting for formal registration of that herbicide. So when I met with these folks in the spring, they were anticipating an October registration. When I circled back to double check with them, putting these slides together, they pushed that registration expectation back to December. So we'll see how that impacts things going forward for them. And then the third one here is Double Team. This one, there's been some talk about this technology for a while as well. The genetics are from Sorghum Partners. The herbicide is going to be from a company called Adama, and it's going to be a quizalofop formulation, which is the same thing as Assure. Okay, so when I checked back with those guys earlier this week, they didn't have a name on that formulation for me. They're still working on the EPA registration process there. And the story here is that they're expecting some more advanced testing for next year. Okay, so that's a little farther out. I know we've got some company folks on the call, so if you guys want to add anything to that, I'll be happy to stop talking and let anybody else that wants to say a piece jump in here.
I guess I can take the ins and talk there real quick, Sarah.
Yeah.
We will be having at least 2 varieties coming out in 2021. We've actually been working on this for 8 years now. So talking with some of the guys there at Corteva and the old DuPont and everything, they're happy that it's finally coming around. So we'll have we're going to call like a soft launch in 2021. So we will have a lot of these in plot sets. We'll also have anywhere from 20 to 40 fields in the area that we can actually use the technology. We'll have field days, those type of things, so growers can touch it, feel it. You know, they look like Milo, as crazy as that sounds. The big thing was that trait's a little hard to work with, so getting trait purity is one thing that we really pushed a lot on, and also yieldability with our current lineup. We didn't want any yield drag or anything associated with it there. So it's finally coming to fruition 8 years later. So here we go.
That's great. Thanks for adding that, Mike. The folks that I talked to weren't quite as firm on that. So that helps. Thank you. So talking weed control. First off, these are not my data. These are data from Garden City. So you know, I've got some Inzen sorghum here in Manhattan, and I've also got some Igro sorghum here in Manhattan, but the stories there aren't super interesting as far as weed control goes. You know, we applied things timely, got good rains, and across the board, weed control looks pretty good in both of those systems. But this is a sorghum checkoff funded project here that was done in Garden City, and what they did is it was a bare ground study, so non-cropland. And they looked at 3 different timings for the herbicide active ingredients that are going to be used in these systems, just sort of trying to get some differences and some better data on how do these compare against each other and against some other grass control measures. Okay, so this slide is a little busy, so I've broken it up, but a couple of points, or really one main point I want to make here. That dashed gray line represents about 80% control, okay? None of the later applied herbicides, so you're talking 10-inch foxtail up to 15-inch crabgrass. Guys, none of these worked very well. So we're gonna talk about this a little bit more later, but you know, timing and getting weeds when they're small is really important for getting good weed control. And same thing holds true for these new technologies. So the first weed that I pulled out here, green foxtail, some things to look at is that the imazamox, so that Imiflex, was providing better foxtail control than some of those group 15 products that we might currently be using. Okay, When we look here at that kind of early post application time, a timely application, 10 ounces of Assure, so that would be a higher rate of the product to be used in the double team sorghum, was the best choice there. Moving to shatter cane, again, the imazamox was giving us better control than some of those group 15 products, so something to think about there. However, it wasn't as good applied post on the shatter cane. And then for crabgrass, not any major differences in terms of herbicides applied pre, but when we went to that early post application, the Assure and the Accent were providing a little bit better control of the crabgrass post. Okay, so some takeaways there. When you're thinking about imazamox and that application timing, in this particular study, the pre-application timing performed better than the post-emergent application timing. So if you're thinking about that system and how you want to position it, the use of that product, think about pre. And that's important because the label is going to be written that you can only apply that product once in the growing season. So thinking about when to maximize that is going to be important. And then the other takeaway I think there about that Imiflex or imazamox product is that when it is applied pre, it's better than some of those group 15 products like Dual or Outlook on foxtail and shatter cane. When we looked at the other two products, the Accent and the Assure, early post timing better than a late post timing, weed size matters. And in general, when we think about post-emergent applications, the Accent and the Assure were better than the imazamox. So if you're looking for post control of grasses, the Ensign or the double team system might be more beneficial for you. And then just some general thinking about differences in the weeds. With Accent and Assure, they're not as good on the foxtail, so they had better control on the shatter cane and the crabgrass. Okay, do you guys have questions? Well, we'll keep going. All right, so one other line of discussion I want to have about those new systems is this idea of product stewardship. Okay, so why on earth am I showing a slide here with glyphosate on it? Because I think a lot of people think about glyphosate right off the bat when they think about herbicide resistance, right? So what we're looking at here is the number of cases around the world of weeds that are resistant to glyphosate. So here in 2020, we're sitting at about 50 different species that are known to be resistant to the herbicide glyphosate, okay? So when we think about double team herbicide, that type of herbicide isn't called an ACC-ACE inhibitor, it's the grass herbicides, okay? We don't talk about those quite as much in terms of herbicide resistance, but look here, in 2020, we're sitting, I think the actual number is 49 cases of herbicide resistance around the world, okay? So it's gonna be important that we are ensuring good use and good stewardship of this product to try to manage resistance. And then when we think about the Imiflex, the imazamox, and the Zest, the nicosulfuron, these are ALS inhibiting herbicides, okay? And if you come out here to 2020, there's over 160 cases of different species of weeds that are known to be resistant to ALS inhibiting herbicides. So it's going to be super important that we take good care of these technologies and try to do what we can to prevent the development of resistance. The other thing I think we need to talk about a little bit when we talk about stewardship for these products is this idea of outcrossing. So, you know, this is something that's been talked about with herbicide-resistant canola, with herbicide-resistant corn, anything that has weedy relatives, okay? And so these are a little older data. They're from 1996, but what these guys did is they took a grain sorghum crop, took a Milo crop, and then they placed Johnson grass plants at different intervals from that grain sorghum crop. So going out kind of a 0 to 2 feet range, a 2 to 16 foot range, 16 to 164 feet, and 164 to 328. Those feet come out kind of wonky because they did it in metric units, and I converted them to English units here. So 0 to 2 feet, there was depending, so they had 2 locations in 2 years. So over the 4 locations, the rate of outcrossing of grain sorghum going to the grain sorghum pollen going to the Johnson grass was 1 to roughly 10%. In that 2 to 15 foot range, 3 to 12%. And then they even found in a few cases out here, in their farthest distance, they found a little bit of outcrossing. So when we talk about product stewardship, it's important, guys, that we think about getting 100% control, okay? Because we're not just talking about saving yield, we're talking about saving the technology. So things to think about with product stewardship: starting clean. We'll have that discussion again here in a minute. And then we're working real hard here at stopping seed production, right? So things to think about: mixing and rotating effective herbicide modes of action, making sure we're using residual herbicides, perhaps even in our, or not perhaps, even in our post-emergent applications. Point number 5, they're using the right rate at the right time. Cutting rates, we've learned, is not a good idea. And, you know, sometimes weeds get away from us, but we need to be as close as we can to timely applications in terms of weed size. Point number 6, thinking about non-chemical management options. And so, you know, that's as simple as just good agronomics. Picking the right, like you guys have talked about this morning, picking the right variety for your environment, and giving that variety the best chance that it can to grow well. And then point number 7 there is scouting. Making sure that you're doing a good job checking for those weed escapes later in the season. All right, so why in the world is this crazy woman showing us a picture of a explosive rat? I wanted to try to get your attention here a little bit. I kind of like World War II history. One of the things I recently learned is that the Allies, for a point in time, considered exploding rats as a good strategy for stopping the Nazi, quote, war machine. Okay, so they were trying to be saboteurs. The point was that the Allies were going to plant these rats in coal shipments so that the coal trains would explode and and blow up the factories with them. Kind of gruesome, kind of crazy. But sometimes, guys, I think we sabotage ourselves in terms of weed control. So, you know, some things that sometimes happen is not using the right rate, maybe not using the right adjuvant, spraying weeds that are too large, so that the herbicides aren't working effectively. And then something else that we can do to sabotage ourselves is forgetting or failing to use a residual herbicide to prevent emergence of those weeds. So I've gotten a call a couple of times this season. I saw Sandra Wick was on here this morning. In particular, Sandra called me with a question about a farmer that wants to know what guys are doing to get good, clean Milo fields. Well, short of being able to pick up the phone and call the farmer with the field that she was referencing that was nice and clean, here's some things to think about if you're looking for excellent weed control in grain sorghum. Point number 1, start clean. You guys know as well as I do that post-emergent herbicide options in grain sorghum are relatively limited. So we need to start clean and not put those post-herbicides in a position where they have to try to work miracles. Point number 2, use a pre-emergent product. So if you're talking about at planting, Bicep, Degree Extra, Lumax or Lexar, something with a little atrazine in it. Another option, if you have trizine or HPPD resistant weeds, so HPPDs are those bleaching herbicides, you might think about Verdict. That could be an option. Something else to consider is splitting your atrazine application up to try to carry through that residual component of atrazine a little further. Then when we think about post-emergent herbicides, guys, really not a lot of options, not a lot of great options. Dicamba or 2,4-D, but of course we've got crop safety concerns with there. We're kind of limited as far as the window of application. Another option is Husky, but again, herbicide resistance might be a concern. If you do want to use Husky, that would be a good place for that post-application of atrazine to try to increase some of the activity of the products in that herbicide. And then the third point there is adding a residual herbicide. So something like a Dual or a Warrant or an Outlook, one of those group 15 products. So let's say you want to go in with a on-label application in terms of crop growth stage of dicamba or 2,4-D, putting some Dual or Warrant or something like that in there can extend that period of weed control that you get from that herbicide application. That's assuming you get activation. So this is something that I've noticed has been a topic of conversation in more than one place as well, is how much water does it really take to get these herbicides activated? And which product do I use when and where? Honestly, it comes down a lot to the choice, I think, comes down a lot to the first part of that question, especially in terms of thinking about post-emergent applications in grain sorghum. So I literally lifted this language right off of the herbicide labels in terms of what they say about herbicide activation. So you can see that the required rainfall ranges anywhere from 1/4 of an inch up to a full inch. So, you know, thinking about that acetochlor, for example, Warrant formulations for that layered residual with your post-emergent herbicide application is something to think about pretty hard if you're thinking about full season weed control in grain sorghum. So takeaways from these slides: herbicide resistant grain sorghums aren't silver bullets. Let's not put them in places where we're asking them to do something they can't. They're going to require careful product stewardship. We've got to position our herbicides to succeed. We can't sabotage ourselves and our weed efforts. If we want the herbicides to do their part, we've got to meet them halfway and do our part too. And then the last one there, residual herbicides are important for excellent weed control throughout the season. So that's what I had pulled together based on some of Craig's requests. I hope you will reach out to me with questions. You can see my email address on that slide, or follow us on social media there. We try to post information and interact with folks on Twitter and Facebook. So thanks.
Thank you, Sarah. I know one of the questions, well, I'm glad you kind of brought up the potential of the outcrossing with Johnson grass, because I know that's the reason why I kind of had you talk about the eye growth and the other two potential herbicide resistant Milos. Is Johnson grass is a major issue in Ellsworth and Russell counties, and more than likely the acres that those would be put on is to try to deal with Johnson grass. So definitely gonna have to make sure guys are using these properly.
Yeah, you don't want to set them up where they're going to have poor control. And by poor control, I mean like less than 98% control, because you just don't want that possibility out there.
Yeah. I had another farmer that asked me about just doing a planned post herbicide spray application in Milo. You know, once that Milo hits about 3-leaf stage, you know, start with Banville. And is that a bad idea with especially Palmer?
I don't care what crop you're in, Craig. That proposition of a planned post herbicide makes me a little twitchy, especially with regard to Palmer. That thing grows so fast, it can get away from you. It takes, well, you had some pictures. Was it a soybean field earlier this spring? They were waiting on a planned post, and you guys got rain at the wrong time, and it went from manageable to not in just a couple days' time. So planned post, 100% post programs make me nervous.
Well, I mean, he was talking even with his pre-program, you know, just because he just has escapes. So he was wondering if, you know.
Yeah, I mean, you know, herbicide, there's a reason we use the word program when we talk about these things, right? I think planning on coming back is not a bad idea. If nothing else, it makes you get in your field and kind of check to see what's going on out there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I said, I know there's a few fields, you know, sprayed post, you know, for Palmer, you know, that didn't have the best control for some reason. And I just wonder how fast that speeds up our resistant issue, because it laid the Milo over with 2,4-D and it hardly did anything to the pigweeds, seem like. So
That's not a great program for resistance management.
Yeah.
I know even those half dead critters out there. That's not a good.
yeah, it just
Yeah.
keeps them below the canopy. I mean, once the Milo stands back up, but they're still there.
Yep. And they're making seeds.
Yep. Well, does anybody else have any questions for Sarah? If not, I think you'll have to.
See, I'm trying to figure out how to get the magic screen back. So
Give the sharing to Lucas.
give it up. I've not intentionally. Let's see here. There we go. Meeting controls. Stop share. There we go. All right.
There, can you see what I've got showing? Does that look right?
Yep, you're good.
So, okay, appreciate the opportunity, Craig, to join you guys on the field day today. So, my name's Lucas Haag, Northwest area agronomist based out of Colby. But Midway District's part of my territory. I've got everything from Ellsworth County north and west, along with some other areas of the state at the moment. So, I just wanted, not going to take very much time. I just wanted to hit just a few things that I think kind of or maybe reoccurring issues or weird things that we saw this year. And Craig, I didn't think about this not having an entomologist on board this morning. We've got a lot to talk about bugs wise and sorghum, but I don't have any of that included in this. The first picture here, and something we're certainly seeing a lot of this year, cropping system effects on sorghum. This happens to be a photo out of the long-term, almost now a 30-year long-term tillage versus no-till study at Tribune. And so we're seeing a lot of those. Certainly, a lot of impacts of management are showing up pretty big again this year. So, but the one thing we've talked, if you've heard me at a field day here in the last couple of years, we've tried stressing more, and this is some old data, but I show it still matches what we observed in some more recent attempts at looking at this. But I think one thing, especially in the central part of the state there, such in Midway District, we really need to keep in mind where we plant sorghum over such a wide window on the calendar, keeping in mind, or we plant the same seeding rate on June 25th, or if we're attempting some double crop sorghum, we need to be thinking about treating that a lot differently than sorghum that might be going in, middle May. And the reason of that is it's really no different than what we talk about right now as we're getting ready to put wheat in the ground, right? As we say, as our wheat planting date gets later and later, we really need to be increasing that seeding rate. Well, why is that? It's because we know our window of opportunity to set productive tillers, that window of opportunity is closing on us. Well, same thing in sorghum. As we move that planting date later and later, even in the central part of the state, but especially as we come further west and gain some elevation, we can expect on the tillers to provide a much smaller contribution to final yield. And so this is actually data from St. John down there in Stafford County. What's interesting is, so this represents the bars, green, pink, and white from a low to a medium to kind of a high seeding rate. So basically going, I believe the steps in this were 30,000, 55,000, and 70,000. Again, that early planting date, so the yellow shows how much of the final yield contribution came from the tillers, okay? And so not surprisingly, these earlier planting dates, especially the earliest planting date at the lowest seeding rate, of that 100 bushel final yield, 35, almost 40 bushel of that's coming from tiller contribution. But as we know, as we move that planting date later, our opportunity for those tillers to be productive is going to decline on us. And so, so obviously, as we move later in planting date, moving up that seeding rate becomes more and more important. So anyways, not groundbreaking, but I still think there's probably some years where we've left some yield on the table, particularly in the central part of the state where maybe we got delayed planting because it was wet or whatever, but we didn't adjust our seeding rate upward to go with that. that can become, you know, a double whammy. If you think about, well, if we're planting late because we're wet and we've got a full profile, well, we've got two things moving on us. First of all, our yield potential is now higher than maybe what we would have expected because we're starting with a full profile. And yet that late planting, you know, we're not going to have the tillers to carry us through. One other something we don't typically see, but did get called out to look at some this year was rootless sorghum. This is technically actually a picture of rootless corn syndrome, but it's the same deal. I had several calls on this in Pawnee, Hodgman County, some other out further west. But, you know, it's basically several things can cause this, but, you know, generally what we see in the field is this lack of nodal root development. And so basically the entire plant's trying to be supported by the mesocotyl here, and that just isn't going to last real long. And so you can see here, and obviously you get flopped over plants out in the field. And actually some of the fields looked at, you know, probably stand reductions on the neighborhood of 30–40% in some cases. Here's a good example of, you know, you got no nodal roots providing any type of support. And so you're basically holding everything together with the mesocotyl here. And then as soon as you crack that, not only, you know, we're basically, you know, plant death is pretty much guaranteed at that point. So going back to, you know, causes, shallow planting, I still think we have a tendency to plant our sorghum on the shallow side. If we think about how far these modern hybrids have come in terms of vigor, you know, the companies have done an excellent job in scoring on that. And really the products we see out on the market are so much better in terms of that vigor than maybe what we were accustomed to 15, 20, certainly 30 years ago. And so, you know, we got a lot of guys still, I think, are afraid to push that planting depth the way that they could, and in some cases need to. And that's really the biggest cause that leads to this rootless sorghum syndrome. You know, it's often compounded by wet planting conditions. We get sidewall compaction there. Basically anything that's going to inhibit that nodal root development can lead to this problem. And really a worst case scenario is if we're out there when it's really too wet, we're slabbing off the sidewalls, and then we turn hot dry immediately after that, and we really bake stuff into bricks, so to speak. That's really a worst case scenario in terms of those nodal roots getting development. Another thing we can see happen is if we're not doing a good job of closing the seed furrow, those nodal roots try developing, but they're in that open seed furrow. They're exposed to air, and in hot dry conditions can desiccate off, basically dry out before they actually get a chance to penetrate into the sidewalls and get some establishment there. And then probably the less talked about thing, you know, a lot of this work comes out of, you know, back east in the Corn Belt, looking at it in corn. But I think the other thing we can run into here, especially when we've got brace roots trying to develop above the surface, you know, if we get really hot, dry soil conditions, you know, I think there's times where we can actually basically burn off the tips of those nodal roots as they try and as they come into contact with the soil surface and try and get established that way. So anyways, just a couple of things management wise was going to hit on. Any questions, comments so far on that? I don't know if any of you guys seen any rootless sorghum issues this year. I think it's kind of pretty isolated, but the guys that had it had some pretty pronounced issues.
Lucas, can't like 2,4-D potentially cause rootless syndrome?
Yes, that's a good point, Craig. You know, we got to be careful with any of our growth regulator herbicides. Certainly they can really mess with us on that nodal root development as well. And so making sure we've got, you know, if we're doing a pre-plant application of either D or dicamba, making sure we've got enough, the proper intervals there before planting. Oh, I forgot. I had one more slide in here. This is from some, you know, seeding depth. And again, this is from some trials Ignacio's running. I've planted a lot of sorghum at not necessarily 3 inches, but certainly 2.5. And I know we've got a lot of guys afraid to plant it, you know, more than 1 inch deep. But, you know, as we've got more residue on the surface, crusting's less of an issue than it used to be. We've got more vigor in these hybrids. So But certainly we see some penalty to being too shallow, even further on in the season in terms of growth and development. Just finish up with just a real quick look on some other work we're doing, relating to nitrogen in sorghum. There's a piece of this that's really applied where we're actually doing some nitrogen rate studies, and we've got an effort going on. Dorvar's leading an effort where we're going to revise some of our sorghum nitrogen recommendations. But this also ties into some bigger picture work we're doing, looking at nitrous oxide emissions. Well, why would we care about that? I'm just going to hit the high points here. Nitrate gets converted to nitrous oxide when we've got oxygen limited conditions in soil, when we've got moisture. But then there's also a piece of this. They really wonder what happens after harvest and the breakdown of the roots, breakdown of the residue, how much nitrous oxide is lost. I don't want to get into the weeds on the whole global warming thing, but the deal is the folks that are doing these estimates, nitrous oxide gets dinged really hard because it's got about 300x the warming potential of what CO2 does. And so when they're doing life cycle analyses on these things, we get dinged really hard for nitrous oxide emissions. This ties into something called CARB, the California Air Resources Board. They do a lot of these life cycle analysis. And so, for example, in their last go round, sorghum-based ethanol got dinged really hard. Well, part of that was they were taking nitrous oxide emission values basically out of the Corn Belt and then pairing those with yield potentials for dryland sorghum out of the Great Plains. And so you put that together, obviously that's going to give you a very high emission per bushel of grain or emission per gallon of sorghum-based ethanol. And so kind of frankly, a pretty unfair analysis, but there's to date, no data exists for what our emissions really are in the Great Plains. And so that's kind of what we've set out to do. We've got a joint project with K-State, Oklahoma State, and we'll be starting a new project where Texas A&M's coming on board as well. But basically, trying to plant things, do things is to represent a typical sorghum scenario in the Great Plains. We're using UAN surface dribble applied, and then as well as some urease inhibitors as part of that, trying to look at some differences there in terms of efficiency. And then what we do is out in these fields, we bury these chambers. We've got, kind of think basically what it is, if you think about like a buffet serving pan, cut the bottom out of that, hammer it into the ground, and then we've got this sealed lid that goes on there. And then once a week, we go out, put the lid on, and then pull a gas sample at 15, 30, 45 minutes and an hour, and basically look at the buildup, the nitrous oxide concentration in there, and then analyze that content. So we do that through the season, trying to measure how much is coming off. These are basically kind of our production system. So for example, Colby, we got 115 bushel yield goal. On this particular site year, we had 35 pounds of residual nitrate. So we fertilized, put 95 pounds on. And then the same studies running at Goodwell, Oklahoma, and Tribune, Kansas. Here's kind of some of the initial data we're seeing as far as emissions. So this is in actually pounds of nitrous oxide in per acre. Here's kind of what the important thing is if you look down here on the emissions factor. So what percent of the N applied did we lose as nitrous oxide? And so at Colby, we're running at about 0.3%, Goodwell at 0.44%. The IPCC, this is the International Panel on Climate Change, their default assumption is 2.1%. And so as you can see, our measured values in the field are substantially lower than what the default value is they're using in a lot of these calculations. So in general, basically what we're measuring is 17%, or in other words, less than a fifth of what their default value is. And so I think, I know this is pretty removed from applied, but, and like I said, I don't want to get into the weeds on the the use of the term sustainable and renewable and climate change and all this. But the fact of the matter is these folks, this math is being done. And I guess I feel like we've got a duty, or one of the things that we can do at K-State is make sure we're providing them some realistic numbers to use, rather than just taking some assumptions that obviously are quite wrong for Great Plains dryland production. So anyways, that's where we're at on that. That project's going to expand next year. We'll be out in the middle of an 85-acre field here in Thomas County with some about $300,000 worth of instrumentation. We'll actually be measuring this stuff in real time. We'll be measuring nitrous oxide emissions, water vapor, carbon dioxide at about 10 times a second. And so we'll be filling up some hard drives. But hopefully give better data that's more representative of what happens here in reality rather than just some book value that somebody dreamt up. So anyways, just want to give you a taste of that other work we've got going on. So questions, comments, otherwise, Craig, I can turn it back over to you.
Yeah, I think that about covers it. Yeah, I forgot about any insects discussion. I guess we can visit a little bit about that. I mean, really, haven't been too terribly bad on insects in Milo this year. I mean, early we had some chinch bug issues around in both counties. I know that was a problem on some fields. Aphids this year, we had the cornleaf aphids come in pretty hot and heavy, which actually was a good thing just because they built up our predators very, very good. I did find a few of the white sugarcane aphids around, but there again, I'd come back the next week and could hardly find them. So really our beneficials have really kept up taking care of our aphids. And so far, I haven't heard too much on headworms being that bad this year. And I don't think there's really been many fields treated in our counties for them, but there might be a few. So, Lucas, you have anything on insects wise?
No, just, I mean, a lot of scenarios were really, our beneficials have really helped us out in a lot of scenarios. You know, we did see a fair bit of cornleaf aphid in a lot of areas this year, particularly Phillips and Rooks County, Norton County was seeing quite a bit of that in areas. But I know it's just really kind of amazing how well our beneficials have helped keep things in check this year. Most of my insect calls have been dominated by defoliation issues in soybeans. That's really been our bigger insect issue here this late summer.
All right, I think that kind of wraps it up. Thank everybody for being on, and like I said, I'll post the recording on our Facebook page and my Twitter page, and feel free to share and